I think a big detriment to our own comfort in our life where we are is us only interacting with our mind. Us only referencing our mental capacity when it comes to life lived rather than actually living life. I think sometimes we need to learn how to be more of the world, learning to be more human in a way, learning to not so much identify with such fictitious abstraction in a way. And when I say that, I don't really mean anything grandiose. I really just mean our thoughts about ourselves. How much we can get so invested with certain thoughts and narratives to the point where they become our entire life. I think we get addicted to ways of being so easy that we forget that who we are and what we tend to be is not just a thought. It's not just our mind interacting with the world. It's something possessing a mind interacting with the world. And until we learn how to use our awareness, that awareness, for our benefit, then it's always going to be used to our detriment. And I don't even necessarily mean that in an overt way. I think a lot of us do things that harm us in very covert ways, in very subtle ways, in very passive ways, and we treat ourselves as a subtle undercurrent to the lives that we live. We don't allow our certain definitions to grant us freedom. And when I say that, I mean we have certain labels on ourselves that we don't shed in midst of change. We hold on to such a strict definition of ourselves that we can't actually accommodate or make space for ourselves in new circumstances. And I think that's the beauty of life, is to recognize that there is no real circumstance other than the ones that you have internally. There is no real feeling other than the ones that you have internally. And it's in your best interest, I think, to sort of take responsibility for your feeling, not for your causes, but for your reaction to them. I think until we give ourselves permission to feel, then we're always going to feel in reference to our disdain for feeling. And what that means to me is sometimes, maybe this is just me, but sometimes in the past when I would feel things, I would sort of try to reject that feeling so adamantly, like it wasn't part of me, or punish myself for even feeling a way about a certain situation. But that's never going to actually lead us to our healing. I think we can't heal what we don't acknowledge, and a lot of us are trying to work with pieces and parts that we never truly look at. We want to be healed in a certain way, but we don't actually know what healing is. Because I don't even know what that is. Most of the time. Sometimes. I don't know. I think sometimes we only work with pieces. And I don't know. It's almost like we get part of the puzzle. We get part of our answer and we call it sufficient. Like we do a little bit of introspection. We figure out something that makes us work this way and we call ourselves done and we wipe our hands clean. And I don't mean that to say that all of our life needs to be overzealous self-work and constant looking towards itself. But I do think we have to acknowledge that change is always occurring. And there's always a greater opportunity to reach new heights in a way, even if we are at the top of wherever we are. And I wrote about this yesterday. The whole idea of having a mentality that actually accommodates where you are. Referencing your top is where you are. Like you are at the top of where you are. You can only do what you can with what you have, and there's no point in jeopardizing and degrading that current experience in reference to heights unreached. So the objective, if anything, would be to give yourself some type of bearing towards where you are. So you actually can, when granted the opportunity, climb to higher heights. And I think the greatest height that we can ever give ourselves is always an internal thing. It's never really a reference to our real achievements or our struggles or anything like that, but more so us giving ourselves an opportunity to truly be where we are. And I think in being where we are and sort of allowing things to be and allowing ourselves to be without reference, we open a lot of doors. Like, even right now, I'll say, for example, even right now, like a second ago, I wasn't really allowing myself to mesh into the moment because I was hearing too much in the background and I was thinking about that. And instead of, okay, I'm just going to pause my stuff, go deal with that in a way, I just decided to let it be. And that's what brought me back to the moment, is my allowance. Not my overt control over a circumstance, but the allowance of it. And I think in that way, I've learned to control myself. I think what we try to control in a lot of ways always controls us. And until we give ourselves, I guess, the space that we occupy, and I always say this, but it's really about, the presence that you have and the volition that you have with that presence. I think a lot of us don't have a stark definition or decision that we want to tend towards. And I think in that way, our decision should be to find something to tend towards. And in that way, we'll always find it. I think a lot of us want things to sort of just fall in our lap in a way. But the only way things can truly fall on our lap is if we open our lap for things to fall on. And sometimes we don't do that. Sometimes we want to receive, but we don't ever put our hands out to receive. And I don't mean that to say that we always have to be waiting on our salvation, waiting on this, that, and the other. Because to that same extent, I think a lot of times we already have what we need. And the greatest way to affirm that or to receive is to retract your hand in a way and to recognize that you've already received a lot of the things that are sort of looming in your mind. For a lot of the things that we even want and desire are more mental than they are in the physical world. We can say we want a certain possession, a certain achievement, but those achievements are just representative of feelings, of markers for us, of things that we want to do in order to affirm a character. And I don't mean that to say that we can't do things to affirm us. I'm doing stuff to affirm myself all the time. But I think we need to recognize that true affirmation always comes from being, not from expression. It's about really giving yourself affirmation for who you are, inside and out, and accepting everything, including the positive and negative, so you can actually make a choice. I think when we reject the negativity of life, of ourselves, we sort of perpetuate it. Because if we never look at what we're trying to heal, then it's more likely to harm other parts. And that's why I think we really need to give it attention. But attention is not the same as actually living in something. You can be aware of pain without giving into pain. You can be aware of a circumstance without giving into circumstance. And I feel like one of the greatest things I've ever done for myself was learn how to not separate myself from my mind, but recognize that the mind is not everything. Just because I have a thought about this person's conduct or this event does not mean I have to react in a way that's proportional to the negativity I'm experiencing in my head. Because what else is that going to do except enforce and affirm the feeling? And that doesn't mean that I can't necessarily see things in a way that's negative or accept things that way. But in accepting them, I'm allowing it to not be a part of who I am or a part of my experience, a part of my current circumstances. And when we do that for ourselves, then I don't think there's anything else that can truly get in our way. I think we are our biggest prohibitor 9 times out of 10. And it's not even necessarily because of something overtly that we do, but all the covert things, all the things that we don't really pay attention to, like our own health, our own longevity, our bodies, our minds. And we feed ourselves both physically and mentally things that don't really stimulate us, things that don't really give us what we need. And instead of actually learning, to be at peace with who we are in our mind, or at least I'm speaking for myself. Sometimes I will bombard myself with a lot of things. I think some of the greatest development that I've ever undergone as a person, that I think anybody ever has, is learning how to sit in silence with yourself. Learning how to occupy your space without stimulus, without something in your face. I think social media, a bunch of stuff has ruined the way in which we're able to be in the present, because we make it about something. What are you doing right now? Oh, I'm doing it. I'm doom scrolling. I'm doing this. I don't know. We're always occupying ourselves, but we're never letting ourselves occupy the moment. We're never allowing ourselves to be the occupation. Instead, we allow it to be, funneled and fragmented in everything that we do, to the extent that sometimes we forget the person doing it. And then we have certain questions and certain narratives that we want everyone else to answer because that's where we're putting all of our time and attention. We're interacting with the mind so much, our mind in the world so much, that we forget that there's a person doing it. And it's almost like we spend our entire lives interacting with our mind in the world and then judging from everyone's reaction, judging from how circumstances, events, and putting ourselves into certain things like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to, and never really sitting with yourself, never really giving yourself a chance to answer some of your own questions and always asking the world around you. And I don't necessarily think it's negative to ask the world around you, but I think sometimes we either get answers that are unbefitting or answers that just feel good for our ego. And I think the greatest answers that we can give ourselves are truly self-given. And of course, you can embrace your own delusion. You can embrace your own whatever. True honesty is something that you have to give to yourself. And the only one that can harm or benefit from it is you. But that's your only real opportunity for growth. I think when we don't reference growth as an achievement in and of itself, we think we only achieve by growing. And oh wait, we only grow by achieving, sorry. So the objective really shouldn't be to constantly find things to achieve, but to reference ourselves enough to allow it to be an achievement in a way. And I don't even know if what I'm saying makes a lot of sense, but I hope it does. Because I think some of the most comfortable times I've ever been in are always times where I didn't really reference my growth to achievements and sort of allow myself to grow into the moment and allow myself to be new within the moment. And any type of newness that we grant ourselves within the moment is, I think, what true life is about. If we can recognize that everything around us is constantly being renewed and revamped in ways that, we really have no distinct control over, then we can recognize that we can give ourselves that same liberty. They always say like the tree doesn't ask if it's a tree, the tree doesn't ask how to be a tree. And I think we don't really need to ask how to be human. But what I do think is we abstract ourselves from what we are by thinking so much. Instead of being human, we're an identity. And then someone says something about this identity, you're hurt as if they harmed your body, as if they know everything about you, as if they know everything about your livelihood and your character. And I think that's one of the shortcomings of interacting with so much mind, is when we actually think we are, then we are just as malleable as we can think of anything different than what we currently do. When I say that, I mean, thoughts are easy to alter. Someone can tell you something negative and you can think something negative about yourself due to that someone saying something. And until we give ourselves any type of basis in who we are, regardless of our thoughts, beyond our thoughts, then we're always going to be as shifted, as ever changing, both positive and negative, as we are open to listening to others' words. And closing yourself off to the world just so you have some type of firm bearing on who you are, I don't think always works in our favor. It may work in some type of isolative stance, but I think there's a grand opportunity when interacting with anyone, with interacting with the world around you, that is being able to recognize that you don't have to base anything about who you are off of anything outside of you. When I'm in certain social settings, especially nowadays, sometimes I look at it as an opportunity to just recognize more of who I am, to explore more of who I am, rather than to have it affirmed and molded by other people. It's an opportunity to express your freedom, especially those of us who have maybe overthought social situations, overthought our interactions with the world, overthought a bunch of things. Everything is an opportunity to recognize the affection you can give yourself. And I think I try to exemplify this as much as possible. Like, even when I'm in class and I'm bored and I don't want to do it, sometimes I give myself affirmation just for being there, just for being able to be alive, just for being able to give affirmation. I think when we make ourselves so stimulus dependent in order to give ourselves something positive, in order to be happy, then we'll only be as happy as we are stimulated by the world around us. And then when times come when we are bored, when we are, I don't know, feeling negative or without some type of direct something in our face, then we're going to expect it and seek it out in the world rather than allowing ourselves to give it to ourselves. And that's what I think real self-love is an opportunity to actually see who you are and see the person that's doing all your action. I talked about it earlier in the video, but how we sometimes go through our entire lives without really referencing the person living the life. And self-love is an affirmation of mind. It isn't telling your mind, oh my God, I love my mind so much. It's loving yourself. Looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, I love you, and not referencing your mind and thoughts about who you are, but instantiating new ones. If we never give ourselves a chance to posit new thoughts and new ideas into our own mind, then we're always going to be waiting on others to fill us up. And if you don't fill your vacancies, they're always going to be filled up by other people and other ideas and maybe things that we wanted to have discarded. And that's why I think you can't really replace bad habits with absence. You have to fill it with something new. And the same thing goes with the vacancies that are created by our change and development. We want to say we want to rid ourselves of certain parts or we want to shift them. But we have to be the ones to actually do the shifting. Because you're never really actually getting rid of much of anything. You know, mean and nice are the same thing, just on opposite ends of a scale. You can say mean by not nice. They're the same thing. You can say nice by not mean. It's something called the law of polarity. All of those things sort of exist in a subtle reference to each other, and in that way, we don't really ever get rid or add anything new to ourselves. We're just shifting the way that they are in terms of our own characteristic. And if we can recognize that, then everything that we've ever needed, everything that we already are, everything that we will be is already within us now. And I talked about this in my last video, I think, about, or at least briefly, about how we need to learn how to give ourselves all that we can where we are. There's no point in being where we are in a way if we don't give ourselves the moment we occupy. And what that means to me is giving yourself as much affirmation you can for what you have accomplished, for who you are right now, for everything that you encompass, for what you get to experience in the moment. And allow it to continue to grow and change as you continue to encounter more circumstances, as you continue to encounter more of yourselves and more opportunities to supply yourself with more affirmation. I think if we learn to live our lives in this way, then it won't really be about anything negative. That won't be at the forefront of our mind. It will be more so how to regulate our nervous system in order to allow more good things to enter it. It's always about what we allow. Allowing ourselves to occupy the moment, allowing ourselves to love, allowing ourselves to be loved, allowing ourselves to actually work towards our desires, allowing ourselves to be beyond our doubts about our achievement. And it's always going to be an allowance. But I think what makes that allowance easy is getting out of your own way mentally and not associating so much with certain ideas that limit you. I think when it comes to us, we have certain descriptions, certain definitions of who we are that don't really align with what we want to achieve at times. And until we learn how to dispel those current definitions, then we won't ever be able to really define anything new. And I think that's why a lot of us are stuck in a cyclic loop, because we've never reestablished who we are. We want to change one certain aspect of our character, but we won't take the time to understand why that even is part of our character. And healing the part of ourselves that seeks out change enough that is expressing that thing. I think every one of our expressions has root in some form of our embodiment. And what I mean by that is we all have parts of ourselves that are seeking to be expressed. And the way at which they're expressed is purely up to the way at which we're present enough to express them, or the way in which we know to express them. Sometimes we don't know any basis of self-love. We don't know how to do that. So we find it by making others love us, by thinking others love us. And I think sometimes we take ourselves away from our real abilities, our real capabilities in truly being who we are. And I know this video is getting kind of long, but I still feel like talking. I don't know. It's sort of a beautiful thing to be able to be free enough to choose and recognize that you are free enough to choose, and you always have been. Even in the midst of my most negative circumstances in life, oftentimes something in my mind just clicks. It's like I recognize that it's really just an event and circumstance. And as long as I'm, for the most part alive, because I feel like most of our events, danger and whatnot is mostly mental. It's not really us, getting hit by a bus one day. I mean, it can be, but most of the time it's not. And what I mean by that is we're getting so habitual and attached to our own mental capacity that we allow it to be our governing body. We interact with it all the time when we allow it to be in reference to our vulnerability. We treat it as if it's something that needs to be protected, our identity, when it's something that really needs to be expressed, really needs to be given a open door, really needs to be expressed back to yourself so you're actually able to see what it is you're trying to express. If we never give ourselves what we are intending to receive from the world, then we're always going to be stuck in a performance. Oh, I have to do this so they react this way. I have to do this so the world reacts this way. Without ever giving ourselves a reaction that we can give. You can clap for yourself. You can give yourself applause. You can cheer for yourself. And that's why our affirmation note is so important. But I think affirmation without regard to knowledge, without regard to knowing why you need that affirmation, I wouldn't say it's worthless, but it has so much more potential. When we allow ourselves to really see the parts of ourselves, that ask why. And when I say that, I mean, sometimes when we're hurt by a certain circumstance, for example, we only look at the circumstance. We only look at that small part. And we don't really give ourselves to our issue in a way. We allow our issues to just be representative of these small things without ever opening the door to more of our understanding. And what that means to me is asking yourself why you're asking why in the first place. Why did they do this? Why am I asking why did they do this? Because I feel this way about myself. And if we can recognize that core, I feel this way about myself, we can ask why we feel that way about ourselves. And we can recognize the thoughts that have led to that. And then instead of falling back into those thoughts, falling back into that victim mindset of constantly compounding upon yourself in super negative ways, we can give ourselves something better. The world is constantly being painted by our own affirmation, by our ability to sort of feel ahead of our experience and, sort of be happy where we are and allow that happiness to shift into the perspective that we have of the world. I think that's always how it is. I think we can recognize that how we currently feel, how we currently think, and our current circumstances are all the result of what we have thought. Like, oh, I thought this maybe subtly negative thing, and now I don't have the confidence to do this. Now I think I need to work on this. It's always in reference to the things that we don't give ourselves. And that's why I think we need to start living our lives in reference to what we can actually give ourselves. And I think that's what it means to be sort of at the top yet ever climbing. Continuing to give to yourself while constantly affirming where you currently are. All that to say, dang, it's kind of long. Thank you. Keep being great. Hope you guys resonated with some of this in the video. Yes, my hair is shorter. I had to trim it. Not the best thing. A lot on the way, a lot already here. Um, Book on the way, October. Stay tuned for that. I appreciate y'all. Keep being great. Love you. And